Hilchos Geirushin Perek Shloisha Asar, the laws of divorce, chapter 13, the final chapter. Today, God willing, we're going to finish this set of laws. And we are continuing the theme that we began yesterday of Agunot, women that are stuck in limbo because they're not aware if their husband has passed away, and therefore if they're allowed to get remarried. And we're learning the laws that govern the principles of when we believe testimony about the husband's death. Yesterday, all the cases we discussed was what's called Shalom Beino Leveina v'Shalom Ba'olam. There was peace between the couple and peace in the world. In other words, a standard case. Everything was fine in the house. The husband takes a trip abroad. There's no war. And he just doesn't come back. And witnesses testify this way, that way. If there's arguments, we saw all the laws yesterday. Today, we're going to talk about the cases where there's no Shalom Beino Leveina. If the last circumstance we knew was some quarreling in the home, and then the husband leaves. And also what happens if there's a time of war in the world, as well as a bunch of other big discussions that have become a huge part of rabbinic literature over the generations. What are the signs that you can use to identify whether a person is considered to be dead or not? The Rambam begins, Halacha Aleph, Ha'isha sha'amra lebayla. A woman tells her husband, Geirashtani bifnei pleini upleini. You divorced me in the presence of two witnesses. Ubo oisan ha'edim v'hikrishua. Those witnesses show up, we ask them if it's true, and they deny it. So the last thing we know is that this couple is in a fight, because the wife accused the husband of divorcing, and the witnesses never corroborated it. And then she and her husband take a trip. And there's peace in the world, but there's no peace between them. And then she comes back and says, oh, my husband is dead. At this point, sorry lady, we cannot believe you. Because this woman is presumed to be a liar. Clearly, she wants to get away from her husband's jurisdiction. And so, we cannot believe her. If one witness shows up, it's not just her. There's a witness supporting her and saying that her husband is dead. She still cannot get married. In this case, where she has already a record of lying, because perhaps she hired him. However, because at the end of the day there's a witness supporting her, if she did get married after the fact, we're not going to force her out of the marriage, because the bottom line is she has a witness who is corroborating her testimony. Halacha beis. Let's address the other situation. There's peace in the couple, no problem, they have no issues, but there's war in the world. And she comes back and says, Meis baili bamilchama. This is the case here on the screen here. She comes to court and says, my husband died in the war. There's a picture of the war, and her husband died. Eina ne'amenas. She's not believed. Even if there was peace between him and her, there's no reason to suspect that she's trying to get out of a marriage. Wartime is different. Because perhaps in a time of war, she will rely on things that look like, mostly will lead to death, and therefore she'll just say arbitrarily that he died. For example, her husband was in a troop, he's in a battalion. All the people in front died. All the people in back died. Her husband was in the middle. She says, and probably logically so, if these guys in the front and those guys in the back were killed, and probably her husband was killed amongst them too. Therefore, she's not believed, because in wartime people are a little more paranoid and they may misjudge the situation. And here goes the Rambam with a very big innovation. Even if she says, Meis bamilchama ukvartiv, he died at war and I buried him. Later on in the chapter, we're going to see that adding that word, I buried him, is more of a reason to make you believable. Here, when it comes to the wartime, even if she says, I buried him, we don't believe her. And the commentaries are debate the reason why. Some say it's because we think she'll exaggerate it. She saw him dead, in her opinion, and she was so sure that he was dead, she's like, you know what, I may as well have buried him. That's one opinion. Others say that even maybe she did bury somebody, but because at wartime everybody's so confused, it's very possible that she buried another man. In her fear, she buried somebody else. So adding the word, I buried him, doesn't make you more believable in wartime.
Identification?
Huh?
No ID.
We don't have an ID.
What was she doing out in the war? I thought she was staying.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe she went to visit her husband on the front. She saw the explosion, whatever it is. Avolim amra meisal mitasai. But if she says he died in his bed, then even though in the world it's a time of war, ne'emenes, she's believed. So long as she doesn't link the husband with the war, she's believed like any other case. Halacha Gimel. What does it say over here? Okay. If we don't even know about war in the world, this is before WhatsApp, before internet, you could be living in one place and have no idea there's a war going on somewhere else. So we don't have a presumption of war in the world. Uba va'amra, and she comes and says, Milchama hoisa b'makom ploini umeis b'milchama. She gives us all the information. There was a war in this city, and my husband died at war. So here we have to invoke the principle that we said yesterday, which is called hapesha asar hu hapesha hitir. The mouth that forbids is the mouth that permits. If you're our only source of information, you can say whatever you want and we'll believe you. So here, since she's the one telling us about the war and the one telling us about the death, there's more reason to believe her. And so the Rambam rules, initially we're not going to allow her to get married because it's a time of war. However, because she's our only credible source, if after the fact she gets married, we're not going to force her out of the marriage. So too, a woman comes to court and says, my husband died in the avalanche, in the landslide. Surfside collapse. The towers came down. The woman says, my husband died in the collapse. Eina ne'emenes. She's not believed. Same thing, because she might rely on the majority. Similarly, if there was a swarm of snakes and scorpions that attacked a certain locale, and she says, my husband was bitten by a snake or by a scorpion and he died. She's not believed. Perhaps her mind is relying on most people who died by a bite. But she doesn't know for sure that her husband is dead. Halacha hey, Amra, if a woman comes to court and says the following, Ishnu aleinu bayis oymaira. They smoked up our house or our cave. Unfortunately, this is pretty common knowledge now that what happened on October 7th. Many homes, that's what they did to them. They smoked up the homes. So a woman comes to court and says, they smoked up our home or our cave. We were hiding in a house or a cave. They smoked it up. Hu meis v'ani nitzalti. My husband died and I was saved. Says the Rambam, eino ne'emenes. She's not believed. Kashem shenasa lo nes, kach nasa lo. The same way a miracle was done for her, maybe a miracle was done for him. You can't know. Hoisa shnasra ava, and if it was a year of famine, va'amra meis baili, and she says, my husband died, eino ne'emenes. She's also not believed. Because, as the Gemara explains, we assume that she left her husband sick. She saw that he's dying of hunger, but she never actually saw him die. Meis ukvartiv, here you see an example. If she says that he died and I buried him, ne'emenes, now she is believed. Because again, the wartime is much more prone to mistakes. But famine, it's unfortunate, but it's calm. Nobody's worried. So if she says I actually buried him, then there's more reason to believe her. Halacha vav amra, if she says, Naflu aleinu akum elistim. We were traveling, idol-worshipping Gentiles or robbers fell upon us. Hu nerag v'ani nitzalti. My husband was killed and I was saved. Ne'emenes, here she is believed. That's actually pretty reasonable. She'ein darkan la'regas hanoshim. Customarily, these robbers wouldn't kill women. Kedei shenoimar kashem shenutz lahi kach nutzalhu. So that we can apply the reasoning of if she was saved, he was also saved. No, robbers and goyim would actually, as Tosfos explains in the Gemara, would actually kill the men and keep the women alive purposely so they can abuse them. So actually, if she comes to court, it's pretty logical that she would say, he was killed and I wasn't.
When she's declaring her husband met and I buried him, outside the Levad, she doesn't do it by
It's very possible she did. Unfortunately, in those times, there was no middle of the night when there was rampant hunger, there was no time to make a levaya for each person. Everybody was dying left, right, and center. So it was just like nobody had a funeral. It's unfortunate. Put them in the backyard. Halacha Zayin. Hoya dever ba'ilam. If there was a plague, an epidemic in the world, it's COVID. Va'amra, and she says, Meis baili. My husband died. Ne'emenes, she's believed. Here, we don't have to rely on, or we're not worried that she's relying on most people. Because when there's an epidemic, there's no rules. Shadavar pashat b'fi kol adam. It's a very simple matter. Everybody knows this. Shabishnas or shabishas hadever ze chai v'ze meis. In an epidemic or a pandemic, this guy lives and this guy dies. Ve'efshar shiyamusu. Badever na'arim chazakim v'yinatzlu askenim achelim. It's very possible for young, strong men to die in an epidemic, and old, sick people stay alive. Because of this, ein chayshishim lashem asam chadaita al rev hamesim. We're not worried that perhaps she relied on most people that died. Her husband's dead. He's probably actually dead. Halacha ches, kvar amarnu, we already said yesterday, she'ed mipi eid, kosher le'edus isha. That when it comes to testifying about a woman and her status, even hearsay is kosher. You can testify, I heard from somebody else who saw him die. However, there's a caveat. When is that true? If he heard from somebody who has an intellectually mature mind, like a slave or a maidservant. They're adults. Typically, they're not considered valid witnesses. Here they are, but at least they're intellectually mature. But if you heard it from a fool, mentally unstable person, or from a child, you cannot testify based on that hearsay, and we cannot rely on them. However, there is one case where we do rely on children. If you heard a group of school children walking together, and they're saying, we're just coming from the eulogy of this guy, there were this many eulogizers, and there was this sage was there, and that guy followed the coffin, so and so they did with his coffin. They're saying many details. We can testify based on their words, only if it's formulated in this way. We can marry off his wife. The Talmud says something fascinating here, that so long as the kids don't say that many details, we assume they had a pet, little cat or a little bug, and they buried him for play, and they made a whole funeral. And that's what they're describing. They're not actually describing a real funeral, but if they say so many details, then it actually sounds like they were actually at a funeral, and we can believe the kids. Halacha Yud. Yisrael she'amar haragti espleni. If a Jew says, I killed so and so. So now you have a bit of a catch-22 halachically. A person who is a rasha, a person who commits a transgression, cannot be a witness. So if we fully believe this guy that he killed the guy, we actually can't believe him because he's saying he's a murderer. So the Rambam says we kind of divide his words in half. We believe him insofar as the guy is dead. The woman can get married based on his testimony. Because we have a principle that nobody can make themselves into a wicked person. So all we have is this guy testifying that the guy is dead. The fact that he says, I killed him, we don't believe him on that. But the death we do believe him on. This is called in Talmud, palginon dibura. We divide the word in half. We accept part of his testimony, we don't accept the other part. Yud Aleph, Kvar Amarnu, we've already said also yesterday. That if an idol-worshipping Gentile is speaking casually, masiyan al-piv, we can use his words to marry off a woman whose husband's status is in doubt. Ketzal, what does that look like? Speaking casually. If a non-Jew was walking and saying, he was talking and saying, woe is it, alas, this guy is dead. He was such a beautiful guy. He did me so many favors. He was talking and saying, just like, casually describing. I was traveling on the freeway, and this guy that was walking with us, driving with us, he just collapsed and died. It was shocking how he died so quickly. But he isn't coming with intent to testify, he's just saying a story. Anything similar where it's clear that he's not coming to testify, he is believed. Halacha Yud Beis. So far do we believe this guy, that if a Jew heard an idol-worshipping Gentile talking casually, he can testify on hearsay that he heard from the non-Jew, and the woman can get married based on his words. When does this apply? If there's no excuse, no reason to not believe the Gentile. But if there was some kind of way to rationalize the talk of the Gentile, perhaps he intended not for the actual facts, but for something else, then we don't believe him. What's an example of that? For example, you hear a non-Jew saying to another guy, do me this favor, or do me what I'm asking you to do, so I don't kill you like I killed the other guy. So implied in his words is that the guy is dead, but also implied is that he's not really serious, he's just using a threat. He's not considered talking casually, because his intent is to make the other guy fearful. So we can't really believe the facts that he's saying. Similarly, if you hear Gentile authorities, the courts, they say, we killed this guy, they're not believed. We know that the governments used to purposely lie just to implant fear with people. The same applies to all similar things. The commentaries discussed today is there a difference between democratic governments and non-democratic governments
So this guy
in terms of believing them. Huh?
is a killer. When he says to be executed, then you believe that he is a murderer. Whereas earlier, when the guy said, I murdered the person, you don't believe he's a murderer.
Right, because he's a Yid.
Oh, okay.
This is a non-Jew. Halacha Yudalet. Akum shehisiach lefitumay techila. If an idol-worshipping Gentile first spoke casually, that was our initial encounter with him, casual talk, even though it became more formal later, we did some formal questioning, we asked him what's going on, and we checked him until he told us the whole story. We still believe him, and we can marry off the woman based on his testimony because he came initially with casual talk. Halacha Tesvav Kvar Hedanu. We've already stated, also yesterday, that if one witness says, I heard that this guy died, even if it's a three-way chain, I heard from a woman who heard from a slave, all disqualified usually for witnesses, it's kosher for this woman testimony and we can marry them off. But that's only, and it kind of comes out a little counterintuitive, that's only if he has no detail. If he has no detail on the circumstances, he simply reports what he heard, we believe him. But if this single witness or woman or slave says, this guy died and I saw him dead, now all of a sudden he becomes less believable. We have to check into him. So we have to ask him, how exactly did you see, or with what method did you know that he died? See, here it says, I saw Chaim dead. How exactly they're asking him. So now, if he says something clearly going to lead to death, then he's believed. But if he's only going to testify details that are mostly leading to death, now we cannot marry off his wife. You can never testify about a man that he's dead unless you saw him die a clear death. No doubt. This halacha right here becomes the source for thousands of rabbinic responsa in the last generations about defining how we can identify that a person is dead or not. Tazayin Ketzah, what does it look like? What does it mean? Clear evidence, non-clear evidence. Ra'uhu shanafa layam. If what they say is, and here's on the screen, I saw him drown in the ocean. Afilu tava bayam agadol, even in the Mediterranean Sea. Ein meidin alav shemes. We cannot testify on that basis that he's dead. Shema yatsa b'makem acher. The witness on the water bank cannot see the whole extent of the water. So you saw him fall in, but you didn't see him come out. Maybe he came out somewhere else. However, what if they say, notice the difference here. They say, I saw him drown in a pit. If he fell into an area of gathered water, in a pit or a cave, where a witness standing on the edge will see the entire surroundings. You can't miss the guy if he came up. And he waited the time it takes for a person's soul to leave him, and he did not come up from the water. At this point, you can testify that he's dead, and you can marry off his wife.
But if you were in a boat and the person was drowning and you couldn't get to them and you saw them drown, it's close by.
Middle of the ocean?
In the middle of the ocean, would that be believed?
Technically not, because you can't see the entire extent of the ocean.
You're here in the boat, he's right near you, and you see him go down and not come up.
But do you see him?
Yes, you physically see him. You're close enough to see him. Like the Titanic, all those people who died when the Titanic sank, and boats were there collecting them.
Oh, well, if you're collecting them, it's different. If you see them dead, then they're dead.
Yeah.
No, here we're saying he came down to the water, and that's it. That's the last you saw of him.
Okay.
If you don't actually collect him, then
If
you cannot
somebody fell
testify.
out of ocean liner, okay, in the middle of the nobody pay attention, and you get into the he's gone.
Mm-hmm. You can't testify. If you didn't see the guy dead, it's tragic. But if you didn't see, you have to assume that maybe he came up somewhere else.
And that's why there was thousands of Agunahs.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. All these cases in the 1700s, 1800s, this was all about, because pogroms were rampant. People would take trips fraught with danger. Next thing you know, the guy doesn't come home. Now you got to start dealing with this, and it's very, very complicated. Similarly, if somebody threw this guy into the ocean, and they threw a net afterwards, later in, and they bring up, not the full guy, they bring up a limb from the guy's body, which, when a regular human is missing that limb, you cannot live. And even though it's the ocean, since you have this limb, and he can't live without it, you can testify that he's dead, and you can let his wife marry off. The commentaries say you have to wait the time it would take for the guy to die. Because some limbs, they can be detached, and you can still last for a couple of hours or a couple of days. You won't last forever, you're going to for sure die, but you may have to wait a certain time frame.
So what do they have to do?
You have to wait that time frame. You know how long it takes for a guy without a chves, without an arm, yeah, to die. Yud Zayin, Ra'uhu shanafa legoiv aroyos unemedim b'chayetze bahem. The guy falls into a lion's den, or a leopard's den, something like that. Ein me'idin alav. Fascinatingly, you cannot testify that he's dead. Efshar shelo yichlu. Maybe the lions weren't so hungry.
What if his name is Daniel?
What if his name is Daniel? Maybe there's a miracle. You know why Daniel was saved? He fell into the lion's den, and the lion came over to him, and he was about to start eating him, and Daniel whispered, you know, in Jewish law, after the food comes the sermon. So he didn't want to eat him. But yeah, maybe they won't eat him. But if you fell into a den or a pit of snakes and scorpions, or into a burning furnace, or to a boiling pot of wine or oil, or both of the pipes had been slaughtered, or at least most of them. Afilu amadu barach, even if he stood up after that and ran away, me'idin alav shemeis, you can testify that he died. Shavada soifer lamus, because in these cases they'll for sure die. Why are snakes different than lions? The commentaries say lions' lairs are typically very wide. And so maybe when you fell in, you didn't land on a lion or you didn't provoke the lion. But with snakes' pits, they're usually very narrow, and chances are you're going to provoke them, so you're going to die. Same thing applies to all similar situations where it's impossible to live. You're going to for sure die within a close amount of time. They can testify that he's dead. If they saw him hanging. Tzaluv in Talmudic times can also mean specifically crucified. That was the word that they used for that. But typically means hanging. They saw him hanging, and the bird is eating his body. Even if, in addition to that, there's spears in his body or arrows, that's not enough to testify that he's dead. In fact, there are commentaries that actually cite stories that happened in their lifetime. There was a guy hanging and he was brought back down and rescued.
Even with vultures? Even
with vultures. You cannot testify, except, says the Rambam, except if they saw where the vultures were eating. If they saw the birds eating, a place on the body which the soul would emerge. If you would take it away, they were eating at his brain or at his heart or at his intestines, then yes. No, then you could testify that he's dead.
But vultures only eat dead things, so that they would not eat anything that's alive. According to their nature. So not necessarily. I believe. Yeah,
I don't know. According to this halacha, we have to say, I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe, you know what, maybe that'll be different. Maybe it depends which bird it is. I'll tell you what, in these laws of Agunot, the rabbis hang on to every possible thread to make it allowed. Because we'll see in the end of the chapter, we're very, very concerned with allowing Jewish women to get remarried. So I'm sure if that would come up, like it would be a good handle to perhaps create a leniency. Yutes. Eid echad oimer, one witness says, Re'isiv shemeis b'milchama oy b'mapaylas eshetava b'yam hagadol v'meis. I saw this guy die in war, died in an avalanche, drowned in the big sea. Anything like this, which mostly leads to death. So by default, it's less believable, because it's only a majority of death. But here the Rambam says, Im amar kvartiv, if the witness says he buried him, neman, he's believed, but tinasi al piv, the wife can get married based on his testimony. V'im lo amar kvartiv, but if he didn't say I buried him, loy tinasi. Initially, she shouldn't get married. V'im nises loy teitze, but if she did remarry, she doesn't have to leave the second husband. And here, why is this different? How come over here, in the end of the day, we say that he's allowed? So the Talmud deals with the question of, there's a concept called milsa da'avida li'igluye. If a matter is going to come out, the truth will come out. It's more of a reason to trust a single witness. So here, since it isn't the wife talking, it's a single witness talking, there's more reason to believe. Therefore, after the fact, we can allow them to get married.
Because he says that he buried him. If he didn't bury him, then...
No, even if he didn't. I'm saying the last case. If he didn't say I buried him. So there we say, initially you shouldn't let her get married, but if he did, it's okay. Why? Because since a testimony concerns something where the truth will come out, so it's more reason to believe it.
But if either of these had two witnesses...
Two witnesses is a different story, yeah.
How about in the beginning case where this all comes from? It's the same thing.
In which beginning case?
In the beginning case where they asked him how he died, and he said he drowned in the Yamagadon and died. Then he didn't say kvartiv, and it would be the same thing, so she's allowed to get married in that case.
You're saying there's a contradiction here?
Like a regular case where
the part where it says he
You're
died
saying
in the ocean.
the question of died in the ocean.
The thing is, maybe because he said he died. Maybe in the beginning.
Oh, no, very good. Yeah, so the Maggid Mishnah asks, how come it doesn't contradict the other case? Because in Halacha 16, the Rambam said that saying that you fell into the sea is not good enough. And here he says it is good enough. So he explains that it refers to a case where the person remained there and watched for an amount of time sufficient for a person to die without seeing the person emerge from the water.
Oh, okay.
So that's what it is. In the other case, he just walked away. Here he stood there and he sat there and he did, so maybe that would actually apply to your case of the falling off the boat. If you actually waited around enough time, then perhaps you would be more believed in terms of saying that he's dead.
Or maybe it's because he said he died. He didn't say before. He didn't say.
No, he did. In 16, he said, Re'isi Shemes. Chaf. B'cheina isha sheheid la'ed echad. You have a woman who one witness is testifying for her, shetava baila bayam, oy b'mayim she'en lahem soif, that her husband died, drowned in the sea, or in waters that have no end. In other words, you can't see the other extent. V'loy Allah, he never came up. V'avad zichre v'nishtakach shmai. And so much time elapsed, people just forgot about him. His name was forgotten. She cannot get married based on that testimony, as we just explained. But if she did after the fact, it's okay. We don't force her out. Even if it was a Gentile who said, talking casually, that this guy drowned in the sea, and she got married based on his testimony, no need to leave the marriage. But if a sage has the audacity to allow her to marry to begin with, initially, we actually put him into excommunication. That's actually forbidden. If she after the fact remarries, fine. But just to go ahead and allow her to remarry, not allowed.
So I assume in only the cases where it says if she married after the fact, we don't end the marriage. On all the other ones, if it doesn't say that,
then
we do.
Yep, exactly. Chav Aleph, mitza'uhu harug oymes. What if we actually have the guy in front of us that we're talking about? We find him dead or killed. How do we go about identifying a dead body? If his forehead, his nose, and his facial features are extant, and they can recognize through them that this is so and so, we can use that for testimony. But if one of them is lacking, you don't have his forehead, his nose, or his facial features, even if they have tons of signs on his body, elsewhere on his body, and on his articles of clothing or whatever it is, even a specific mole that's very rare and only that guy would have, we cannot use that as testimony. Maybe it's somebody else. When does the earlier leniency apply? That you can use the forehead, nose, and facial features to identify if you found him within 3 days after his death or after his murder. But after 3 days, you cannot testify about him because his facial features become distorted after 3 days.
So the driver's
and
license
this
in his wallet
doesn't help. I mean, look, this is a big discussion, this halacha. The commentaries differentiate between what's called 3 types of signs. Simanin gru'in, bad signs, lame signs. Weak signs. Simanin muvhakin, clear signs. And simanin muvhakin biyoser, very clear signs. Very definitive signs. That's the only one that's believed in terms of the agunas, which led to a whole discussion of today, can you use DNA? Because after 3 days, of course, everything gets distorted, but we can use DNA to actually identify people's bodies, and it becomes a big discussion. I believe that rabbis today are more lenient about that. Like, we do use it in terms of allowing women to remarry. Chav Beis, Tava Bayam, V'yishlicha Ayam Li'abasha, Afilu Achar Kama Yamim. If the man had drowned at sea, and then the sea spat him up to dry land after a couple of days, Im Yikiru Panav V'chatmai, even if it's more than 3 days, if they can still recognize his face and his nose, Me'idin alav, you can testify about him, She'enoi Mishtane B'mayim La'achar Zman Meruba, because scientifically also, the distortion doesn't happen so quickly in water, only after a long time. the water keeps the skin to shrink, and it doesn't allow it to become bloated as it usually does. But if the corpse was sat on dry land for at least 12 hours and it got bloated, now we cannot testify about it because it's gotten distorted. When we do examine the identity of a person to check if it's him, we can check him and see him even by night. By candlelight or by moonlight, it's okay. There's no requirement to have the sun out. Even a weaker light would suffice.
How do you know that shows means 12 hours?
Okay, so your Rambam must not have the word shtemes right. Yeah, mine has shtemes. There's a lot of versions here. The Kesef Mishnah says that it should just say shois. If it waited for a couple of hours. Yours says yud. Yeah, there's different versions here. So mine has shtemes right. Some say 12, some say just plain hours. And that creates an argument, of course, in halacha, like how many hours is required. Chav Gimel. Ro echad oimid merachik. If they see a guy standing from far, the Amar Shehu Pliny ben Pliny, or Pliny mimakim Pliny, and the witness says, you know who that guy is? It's so and so, son of so and so, or from this place. And a snake just bit him, and he's dead. And they go to examine him, and at that point he's already been distorted, and they can't recognize him. They can marry off his wife, because the witness, when he came to them, was sure about it. We don't know now, that's our fault. But he knew, it was clear to him, so we can believe him. Chav Dalet. Ba echad v'amar. It's an interesting case. A guy comes and says, comes to Sherman Oaks, okay, there's a new guy in town, and he says, Amru li beis dinay anashim, I was coming from New York now, and the court told me over there, or somebody told me, Kishetelech l'makom pleni, when you come to Sherman Oaks, Emer lahem shemeis Yitzchak ben Michael, tell them that Yitzchak son of Michael died. So the agent comes and tells us, and he says, I don't know who this guy is. I'm just following instructions. I was told to tell you, Yitzchak ben Michael is dead. He doesn't know who it is. Since we know a guy, and that's his name, Yitzchak son of Michael, now his wife is allowed to get married. We don't say, oh, maybe it's a different guy, it's the wrong, he confuses with someone else. Now, of course, if it's Menachem Mendel, son of Yosef Yitzchak, it's a very common name, so that's not going to be one specific guy. But Yitzchak ben Michael is a rare name, so we would be lenient. A Jew and an idol worshiping Gentile took a trip somewhere. The non-Jew comes back, talking casually, and he says, the guy who came with me on the trip, he's dead. We can allow his wife to get remarried. Even if the non-Jew doesn't know who he is, provided that he says, I buried him. The commentaries divide this halacha. The first part is if he knows him. If he knows him, he just says he's dead, and that's fine. The last part of the halacha is even if he doesn't know him, then if he says kvartiv, I also buried him, then it's allowed. Chavav. Similarly, if we saw 10 people leave a place together, and they were tied in chains, or they were carrying camels. So we saw 10 guys leave together in the camels. Others say a very original translation here. Noisim gemalim is chains that you use to carry camels. So you have to read it as one thing. They were tied down by chains or by camel carriers. But the common interpretation is this case, that you just have a group of 10 guys traveling on camels. Anything like that. And then a guy comes and tells you, casually, says, by the way, guys, that group of 10 people, those 10 guys who went from place to place, they were carrying such and such, they all died and we buried them. We can marry off all their wives. Because this is a very clear group. You can't confuse them with anybody else. If they're dead, they're dead. If a Jew comes and says, Meis ish Yehudi imanu b'makom pleni. There's a Jewish guy, I don't know who he is, a Jewish guy died with us while we were hiking, Kach v'kach tzurasai v'kach hayu simanav. This is his form, this is his identifying signs, and we know a guy who has those signs, but he didn't say his name. Ein oimrim ba'omed hadas plenihu. We don't say by guesswork, oh yeah, it's that guy. It matches the description. Ad sheyoyid ha'ed shehu pleini v'yaskir shmei b'shem irei. Till the witness, in his words, has to actually enunciate. He has to say it's that guy, or say his name, his city's name. You got to give us more info. You can't just say bodily description. Avalim Amar, but if he said echad yatsa imanu meir pleinis v'meis, there was a guy who came on a trip with us from this city, and he died. So now he gives us the city name. That's already room for investigation. We check that city. If the only one guy was known to have left that city, Tinasa Ishta and his wife, of course, can get married because that's reasonable testimony. You come across a document. You come into a house. There's a note. You know, one of those notes. Meis ish pleni ben pleni and erak pleni ben pleni. This guy is dead, or this guy was murdered. The Noidash is Eksav Yisrael, and we can know that it's a Jewish handwriting. Hareza Tinasa Ishta, his wife can get married.
Time out. Jewish handwriting?
Yeah.
We're talking Hebrew?
No, I'm saying the handwriting belongs to a Jew. Basically, as long as you can verify who the handwriting belongs to, and it belongs to a Jew, then the wife can get married. Similarly, if somebody is mute, and we checked him the way we check for divorce, we ask him positive and negative questions, and he's always nodding and shaking his head at the right times. His mind seems clear. And he in his handwriting writes down that this guy, so-and-so, son of so-and-so, has died. We can rely on the handwriting and let her get married. Again, these are all leniencies granted in the case of women. We don't even subject women testifiers to the regular investigation. Usually it goes on in a court. The sages never imposed any laws here to be stringent, only to be lenient. Mishum hataras Agunah, just to allow a woman who is chained down to remarry. Chavteres, the Rambam concludes this chapter and this whole set of laws with the following observation: Al yikshe be'einecha, don't let it be tough in your eyes. Shehitiru chachamim ha'erva hachamura, that the sages here are permitting this unusually severe erva, woman who's not allowed to get married. With these lenient mechanisms. They're allowing a woman to testify, a slave, a maidservant, a non-Jew, hearsay and writing, with no investigation, as we've explained. Don't worry about it. Because Torah was only particular about 2 witnesses testifying, and all the other laws, and if it's a case where there's no other way to ascertain the truth unless you rely on the witnesses and their testimony. Murder cases, loans, monetary loans, the only way we know is by the witnesses. But matters of factual concern, technically, if we had more information, we could ascertain the truth without the witnesses. And if in the end it will turn out not to be true, the witness can't get out of it. You can't say a guy is dead and then the guy shows up and he's not dead. You can't get out of that. The witness says this guy is dead. So therefore, Torah wasn't particular about it. It's very unreasonable that a witness would lie about it, and therefore it's more reason to believe him, especially considering therefore the sages were lenient and believed one witness with a maidservant and writing and no investigation. Agunah is just not to leave Jewish girls chained down. We do our best and our utmost to allow women to get married. Brich Rachamana Desaya, and blessed be the merciful one who grants us assistance. Mazal Tov for concluding the laws of divorce.